Welcome to the Counseling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counseling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of the Counseling Tutor Podcast. I am Rory and Ken is taking a well-earned break. In this episode, I'm going to be speaking with today's podcast sponsor, Darren McLaughlin from WebHealer, about the importance of therapists having a professionally built website to promote their services and instill confidence into potential clients. WebHealer are the go-to provider of websites for private practitioners in the UK. Established over 20 years, WebHealer offers a non-technical and fully supported service to help therapists grow their private practice. Remember, just one customer from your website each year pays for their service. So if you're interested in that, go to webhealer.net and use the coupon CT100 for £100 off their Do It For Me service. That's webhealer.net and use coupon CT100 for £100 off their Do It For Me service. So without further ado, let's welcome Darren McLaughlin.
Hi Rory, how's it going? And thank you very much.
So in terms of why a therapist would need a website, what's your thoughts about that?
Well, that's a great question. I suppose, it's very important to preface all of this to say that the majority of searches these days for anything, be that something related to a DIY project or your own mental health, the first action to researching some information starts on the web. So if you're not on the web and somebody is looking for assistance, you're not going to be found. And if you're not going to be found, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage by comparison to your colleagues who do have a website, a social media presence, a directory listing somewhere. So really a website is incredibly important when it comes to being found online and connecting with potential clients.
Yes, and I think it's an interesting world in the counselling and psychotherapy because it's not like a DIY store where they're advertising screws, nails, glue, I don't know, screwdrivers, that type of thing, like for like products. It's a very unique experience looking for a therapist. So, but I guess by having an online website, a therapist can give a real sense of themselves, a sense of their practice, their uniqueness. And a client might say, I really like this therapist as opposed to maybe another therapist they'd find. So it's a chance for someone to kind of show organically who they are as a therapist, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, look at by comparison to that DIY analogy, when you're searching for something to do with your mental health, an area where obviously there's a lot of stigma still, there is a comfort, security, and a privacy element of being able to search online, which means a website is really valuable to do those things that you just mentioned, to introduce yourself as a partner in that person's, recovery, ongoing mental health, and to introduce yourself and how you work and everything about you and your practice. So incredibly important. I mean, a website as an information resource, incredibly important. For example, we know that there's different types of therapy. There's people-centered therapy, we've got CBT, we've got Gestalt therapists, we've got various different schools of thought. And so when somebody is looking and researching for that first time, how do they know? This is a brand new world for them. And so your website is a real opportunity to handhold and walk that potential client through a potential therapy journey with them as a practitioner and tell them how they work and how it can benefit them. So, as an information resource, incredibly useful.
Yes, and I think you've hit on it. Information resource. A lot of people now look for authority. It's a bit of a cliched term in the world of the internet, but establishing authority, establishing that you and the service you offer is authoritative, that you are a person that someone can invest themselves in. If it's a financial transaction, that they feel they've got value for money, I suppose. And it's a way of showcasing a therapist of who they are and what they know and share information, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. And I suppose there's two things I'd like to bring up here. I mean, certainly the first thing would be the difference between a website maybe and a directory listing or maybe a social media page. So we've spoken to many practitioners who began with perhaps a Facebook page advertising their services, again, how they work and whatnot. But the reality is, when it comes to credibility and authority, anybody can set up a Facebook page. In fact, it's very easy. All you need is an email address and 10 minutes to set up a Facebook account. It's super simple to do. But behind that, we don't really know who this person is. And so immediately when we see, for example, a .co.uk domain registered, or even a .com, the fact that there's a piece of real estate on the internet specifically for a therapist, it adds credibility to their presence immediately. Now, the other thing I want to say about credibility is, specifically when it comes to search engines and things like Google, credibility is incredibly important when it comes to sensitive subjects like your mental health. Mental health type websites of counselors, psychotherapists, are classed by Google as something called your money or your life, which means that the importance of the accuracy of the information on this website is of paramount importance. So credibility on your website, you need to demonstrate it by talking about your qualifications, how many hours you've done, maybe some work you do for a charity. It's your opportunity to convey to a potential client that you are suitably qualified. And also in doing so, you're also showing Google et al. That you are very much a trustworthy source. And when it comes to trust on the internet, Google has this concept called EAT, which is expertise, authority, and trustworthiness. And so to tick that trustworthiness box is incredibly important, not only for the people who are on your website, but also for the search engines to actually feel comfortable bringing potential clients to your website, because Google and others is not going to want to bring potential clients to your website if you're not trustworthy. So we need to demonstrate that to them. And a website is a fantastic opportunity to do that, versus a social media page. And I would pose the question to your listeners: when was the last time that perhaps they were searching for a colleague and found a colleague's Facebook page ranked in the search engines above an actual website? Search engines tend to give preference to websites for that very reason of credibility.
Yes, and I think that's an important point you make, Dara, because what you're effectively saying, that you've got there's two distinct areas of impression here that you have to make. You have to make an impression on your potential clients, but also you have to convince Google that you are a trustworthy, authoritative site for them to be able to rank you higher within the search rankings. So one would be reasonably easy for a lot of therapists to do. Talking directly to the clients, they can talk about their experience, the way they work. The other, and we'll come to that, is slightly more technical, slightly more expertise, and needs more expert help. And I'm guessing that once someone's on a page, one of the things is the call to action, appointment booking, helping people book appointments. They've landed on your page, they like you, but how do they get in contact with you? How do they take the next step?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, at your shop front is definitely a very important, your shop front being your website. But we need to then take that person and we need to bring them over the line to get them to reach out to you and to make contact. So, I mean, look, at probably the most straightforward way is a simple contact form on your website. But a contact form alone isn't enough to invite somebody to make contact with you. We typically find when somebody's searching online, and we probably see this ourselves, if we're purchasing something online, we want to know when it's going to be delivered. We want to know when someone's going to get back to us. When we ring a helpline, we want to know how long we're going to be waiting on hold. So when you're thinking about your contact form, perhaps you should be putting a note to say, I respond to all inquiries within X. That could be the same day, could be 24 hours. That would be one reassuring call to action to blend in with your contact form. Give somebody a reason to contact you, because if they fill out a contact form and they get the sense that you mightn't get back to them for several days, maybe a week, they might be likely to go off and inquire elsewhere as well. And so what you want to do is you want to give that website visitor no reason to leave your site and go searching elsewhere. So website, contact form, incredibly important. Make that call to action really clear. Book an appointment, contact me now. And in some cases, we find something that works really well is putting a link to your calendar for potentially an introductory call. Again, when you're entering into this client counselor relationship, usually it's not just a one and done. Usually you're going to attend for several sessions. And so it's very important to make sure that there's, I suppose, rapport there, an understanding and a right fit between the client and the therapist. So having a link to perhaps a no obligation introductory chat between the two parties, having that on your website. So literally somebody could say, well, I'm free tomorrow afternoon. That would be fantastic to see if this would work out. Let them click, let them book online straight away. Fantastic tool to have. And we find that therapists who integrate that into their website usually get a lot more inquiries than those with just a contact form alone.
Well, there's a top tip right there, isn't there? I mean, that's the top tip right there. And I guess also there's a practical side to this, because if you're using an online calendar, online diary, directly from the website, it manages your diary. So it cuts down on administration.
Well, exactly that. Somebody can make that decision straight away. I would like to engage with this counsellor. And literally within a few clicks, they can pick a time that they see the counsellor has advertised as being open. And so what I mean by that is we would see counsellors who, for example, say, I'm going to keep every Wednesday morning open between 9 and 11 a.m. for introductory calls, as an example. And so if I'm on their website and I see their calendar says between 9 and 11 is free for an intro call, you can book a 15-minute chat. It's just a simple call to action that works because there's clarity. I know I want to speak to this person and I know this person is going to be available to speak to me and I know there's no fee and it's made clear that they will call me. I don't need to call them and it's going to be 15 minutes and this is what we're going to talk about. It's beautiful. It's simple. And it's akin to buying an e-commerce product online. Imagine if you went to a website and it said, don't buy online, call us before buying online. Well, it sort of negates the whole purpose. But if you can buy something online and you know you're going to get it within a certain amount of days, you're going to complete the transaction. Similarly, if you see that a therapist has availability at a certain time slot that works for you, then you go ahead and you book it. That's the call to action. And you're more likely to take it because you know it's going to suit all parties.
You see, that's the thing about, I guess having a professional website designer work with you, because the majority of people who are maybe designing their own websites wouldn't even consider that knowledge that you've just imparted about, how search engines see you, about information about how, a contact form may garner more initial contacts. I mean, I think that's really, really priceless information. Thank you for sharing that. And I guess also, part of a therapist's job nowadays, certainly those who have a strong online presence, is to share news, updates, offer resources. All of those can be very persuasive ways of gaining clients or people sticking with you. If you're an authoritative resource on a particular area of distress that clients have, people will return to you again and again, not just clients.
Absolutely. But, a website, and come back to this concept of credibility, it's twofold. It's credibility for the search engines, credibility for the people who land on your website. If you're the type of therapist that uses the website to keep potential clients up to date, it will shine a light not only to people who land on your website, who see a very up-to-date, not manicured, but just a maintained website. There's nothing worse than looking at a website that you just know has not been changed for years and years and years. I dare say we're, beyond the COVID-19 situation. And so many therapists will leave mention of this up and special working arrangements. And absolutely, although special arrangements still exist, for the most part, we're back to the status quo and how things were. And so when you land on a website, if you're seeing something which is dated, you may be less impressed versus, for example, a website which contains news items, blogs, which are relevant to their field of expertise. So that maybe, something has happened in the world, maybe, it's a conflict or something like that, and the therapist is commenting on it, talking about it in the context of therapy and how they could help and the benefits of therapy in relation to this news item. It's just so much more impressive to the website visitor. It shows that you're keeping abreast. It shows that you're putting your best foot forward. Again, your website is your shop front. If you were a flower shop, come Valentine's Day, you'd have roses hanging out the walls outside. Come Christmas time, you'll have your Christmas trees outside, etc., etc. And a website should be no different. I don't mean that you need a snow effect on your website, come December, but it's important to keep it up to date and alive. It shouldn't be build it once and they will come. Quite the opposite. But also coming back to the concept of search engines, when you keep your website varied, content rich, full of useful content, relevant to the subject matter, which is counseling and psychotherapy services, Google, etc., will see this and say, wow, this person is providing lots of value. They're providing up-to-date content. Now, who do you think Google is going to give the nod to in the search results? Someone who updates the website once or twice a month versus somebody who updates it once or twice every couple of years? I think the answer is clear. Google wants to bring people to websites that add value to the searchers. And so if you're adding value to your website, it's easy to deduce that visitors are going to gain value from that too. And Google wants to make that introduction and connection. So really important to keep your website up to date, communicate with your potential clients, talk to them, tell them that you're not working the day of the King's coronation, tell them you don't generally work UK bank holidays, etc., etc. It's small information, but it's very real information and people really value it.
Yes, and I take your point about, the shop front. Recently I went to a restaurant that was advertising Christmas 2022, booked for Christmas 2022, and we just walked past it. Because it was like, if you've not in 3 months, because we recorded this in the April of 2023, if you've not taken off your Christmas offer, then there's something not quite right about that. It doesn't instill confidence, and it's like going into a half-finished website. It's like going into a half-finished shop with things scattered all over the place. People are very sophisticated in their buying, and they have a very strong sense when something isn't quite right. So important what you've shared, and I guess that brings me to the next kind of section of our interview, which is things a website developer can help a counsellor or psychotherapist with. And, a lot of my colleagues are very, very well versed in therapy, but, some of us aren't very well versed in things like website design.
Well, that's absolutely natural and totally understandable. I mean, you didn't spend 100 hours at the start of your career learning how to put together a website, so it's totally understandable. And look at a website designer. There's lots more website designers than there once were. The ability to create a website is a lot easier than it used to be. I think your listeners will probably be aware of that. However, there's so much information that you need to take into account when putting together a website these days that working with a designer is going to yield rewards. There's no doubt about it. I mean, in the first instance, a website designer can help put together your website in a visually appealing way, and a way, as you mentioned earlier on, that organically represents you and your practice. As a sole practitioner, we have an idea what we like and what other people perhaps think of us. And that's fine, but it mightn't always be the best foot forward to put out there to potential clients. So working with a designer, it's quite similar to going to a counselor who gives you a non-judgmental third-party view on maybe an issue you're having. And so that sort of feedback and input is invaluable for people who attend counseling sessions. And it's just the same for a web designer. A web designer will tell you that color scheme that you've picked really isn't great. It's not going to work. It's not going to be accessible maybe to people with a visual impairment. It's not going to mean that the text on your website can be read easily. People are going to get fatigued navigating your website because it maybe doesn't convey the information in a structured manner. But also, a designer will tell you the really important data points and pieces of information that you do need to put on the website. And I'm referring to things like this concept of your credentials, your training, your experience, and coming back to things like the Google EAT principle of expertise, authority, and trust. A website designer should inform you of those things. So as you're building the website, these things are taken into account at every step. You can't just build a website and then say, okay, website's built, now we need to think about Google. It needs to be a connected process. So as the website comes together, we're building it with attracting more clients in mind. That cannot be an afterthought. And so a web designer will often strike that balance between something that's visually appealing, something that is designed to bring you clients, and something that is designed to convert website visitors into actual clients. So we talked about contact forms earlier on, calendars and whatnot. That's the type of advice a web designer should give to you.
Yes, and we've touched on keeping the website updated, and that comes really down to content creation, adding in content. And I'm guessing that a web developer may be able to help with that.
Yeah, I mean, again, it comes down to developer. I mean, speaking of Web Healer Service, and not necessarily wanting to speak about that in great detail, but generally speaking, a web design firm worth their salt will have some sort of a professional writer on hand. And what that means is that's somebody whose job it is to write copy. They're a copywriter. And so they can often take these ideas that float around in our heads, and I have great ideas, Rory, but I'm not very good sometimes at putting them down on paper. You'll know it from receiving emails from me. Sometimes it's better just to have a chat. But a writer will convey those ideas in a succinct, understandable, and action-orientated type manner. And your web designer is there then to take that information and put it onto the website. Similarly, if you're writing content for your website, for example, talking about a new CPD course or a new area you're going to specialize in, website designer will help you get that onto the website, structured in a way that's readable from a web point of view. Remember, we need to take into account mobile devices. The majority of traffic to websites now happens on a mobile device. So it's great that you write a big essay about this new area you're focusing on. However, is that going to be digestible to somebody who's on a mobile device, reading their phone, maybe on the train on their way to work as they search for someone to help them? We need to consider these things. So a web designer will help with that. But not only that, when that content is written either by the therapist or by a writer, it needs to be input into the website in such a way that it's search engine friendly. So it highlights the key terms. And I don't want to get technical on this particular call, Rory, today, but there are certain technical nuances of structuring content online that really put the best foot forward when it comes to Google. You need to tell Google what you're talking about. And it's not just a matter of writing words. You need to structure that content in such a way that Google sees what you want to, I suppose, bring attention to, So really important skill that really only web designers have, especially when they're used to, I suppose, promoting websites in the search results.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a lesson that I learned very early on. I'd come from an academic background, so I was used to writing academically. And I discovered in very short order that writing academically on a website didn't actually get you found, and it actually wasn't very appealing to those people who were reading it. There is a formula for writing content on websites that people engage with, specifically when they're using maybe mobile phones or tablets, that type of thing. And it's a bit of an alchemy, I think. It's a bit of a dark art. Well, not perhaps a dark art, but it's certainly an art that sometimes certainly I didn't possess at the time. And I guess we can't discuss websites without really talking about how people are found, and that's search engine optimization, or SEO, as it's known in the industry.
Indeed, yeah, and that's a dark art, Rory.
Let's face it. I mean, look, at the end of the day, Google and the other search engines, their mission, their raison d'etre is to bring searchers to a website which answers their question, which adds value to them, and that meets the user's intent. So what I mean by that is, if I'm in Wales, I'm in Cardiff, and I want to see a counsellor in Cardiff, what am I going to search for? Maybe I'll search for, counselling service in Cardiff, or counselling counsellor in Cardiff, something very similar like that. Let's keep it simple. And so Google will return websites of counsellors in Cardiff. Now, why is that the case? Well, it knows that the searcher wants to book an appointment, most likely. And so it's going to return search results of people who are very overt in saying, I offer sessions, here's my price, click here to book now, click here to book an introductory call. Let's be clear that Google knows these call to actions on a website. So if you've got the call to actions there to make connection with a potential client, Google is going to bring more traffic to you because you satisfy the searcher's need. So Satisfying user intent is incredibly important. But back to the process of building a website. When you're putting together a website, this is probably one of the big differences between doing a DIY job versus having a designer do it for you. A website is put together with search engine optimization in mind. So every sentence that's written, every image that's placed onto a website, believe it or not, it has an SEO implication. And if you're not familiar with this, then you're none the wiser. And unfortunately, as a result, you're going to be at a disadvantage straight away. And 100%, there's reams of information you can search for online and self-educate yourself. And that's true. But you can do that for any topic. And the question is the return on your investment there? Is your time best spent doing that? Or maybe is your time best spent working with the designer who's going to do it in a fraction of the time by comparison? So SEO, incredibly important. We need to consider keywords, what the user intent is. And when we're writing the content for the website and putting together the website, we need to structure the website in an SEO aware manner. We need to make sure we demonstrate our expertise. I mentioned that earlier, our authority and our trustworthiness. So things like, for example, mentioning our affiliation with ethical bodies, be it the NCS, BACP, UKCP, or any of the other organizations that are there. These data points are incredibly important, not only to the visitor of your website, but also the search engines themselves, because they can tell when you're talking about these ethical bodies. They can tell when you're talking about your experience or the fact that you qualified 20 years ago. Google, etc., is incredibly complex. Once upon a time, it may have just counted the number of times you said counselling in Cardiff, but that was 20 years ago. We've moved on a lot. Artificial intelligence is on the scene. Other information points come from social media, etc. It's a lot more complex now. And so when we're building that website, we need to make sure that we take into account all these various different nuances at every step, because if we don't, we're not going to get the results that we want.
Yes, absolutely. And there's a picture forming here that this is a very specialised area. Website development is a very specialised area. You would go to a therapist for psychotherapy or counselling, but you would almost certainly, if you wanted a website design, go to a specialist with the same thinking in mind. It's a specialisation. You're going to someone who's got the training and the knowledge and the understanding. And I guess that kind of links in to the fact that we are in a time now where people are rightly worried about things like security and privacy. And certainly websites collect information. And it's really important that anybody who has a website is, in fact, compliant with the laws of the principality they find themselves in, for both legal reasons and obviously for ethical reasons, that they're collecting clients' data and information.
Yeah, absolutely, Rory. I mean, look at it, data everywhere. You visit a website today, you're hit with cookie notices. We store this, we store that. Obviously, GDPR came into effect in the last number of years. It really set the cat amongst the pigeons. Because, listen, data is a very important and a rightly sensitive area. Really important that therapists have an awareness of the information that they're collecting and what they're not collecting, frankly. I mean, so what I'm talking about there is certain personally identifiable information that you're collecting on a website. So you are collecting, for example, the computer or IP address of the visitor. You're perhaps taking the person's name if you're asking them to make contact with you. And there are certain rules and regulations around managing that data. However, if you're using third-party services, like, for example, the calendar booking system and whatnot, usually, and thankfully, you can leverage the privacy policies and the GDPR structure that these third parties have. And most of these companies will have a very robust framework to protect you, because at the end of the day, you need to be seen to be adhering to these data protection rules and laws and making every best effort to make sure you protect the integrity and the privacy of that customer information. So, website designer will talk to you about what you need to do. When it comes to GDPR statements, privacy statements on your website, we personally usually refer people back to their ethical bodies, because the ethical bodies are fantastic. Usually they have some really good and comprehensive guidance in terms of the information that they need to take care of when it comes to GDPR related matters. So in the first instance, I would advise therapists, look to your ethical bodies. They will have some guidance on this specific to you, but also that goes beyond just your website. You do have a client contract, and within that in itself, you will have mentioned to GDPR. So refer to the ethical bodies in the first instance, but when it comes to these third-party plugins like calendar services, booking systems and whatnot, speak to your designer. They'll tell you what your obligation is going to need to be when it comes to this. And hopefully, they'll be on the lower end of things, because of these third parties generally have these boxes ticked very well.
Yes, and as someone who's a data protection officer for 4 different organisations, I can tell you that it could easily become a full-time job, because storing data is in front and centre now of work everybody does. It used to be something we just had to do. Now it seems to be the topic of every conversation. And the other thing, of course, is that there's an ongoing dynamic, isn't there, with websites, in that there are people who will go after finding information, hacking websites, which is why a lot of developers update with patches or fix software or make sure the latest system's up to date, because woe betide the person who doesn't keep up to date with the website. They will end up like my friend, who called me in a panic one morning to find his website was hacked and not very nice things were written on his website in a scrolling banner that went across.
Yeah. I mean, look, at the end of the day, a website is a piece of software, Rory. And I think all the listeners will be familiar, maybe on their phone. They have an Apple phone. It'll say iOS update. It'll put a little message up on your screen saying one update, and you must go ahead and do it. And your computer, your Mac, be it your Windows PC, will tell you this update's available. And a website is no different. The only difference is that sometimes when a website is built, you're set sail, you're set free with this concept of a piece of software which is living and breathing, and you need to update it yourself. Well, a web designer who is a professional web designer will always maintain that for you in the background. Or at least what I would advise your listeners is, if they're engaging a web design firm, ask them specifically, who is responsible for the ongoing updates of the software on my website? Is it me or is it you? And if it is you, how much is it going to cost? And so forth, because at the end of the day, you don't want to end up with this scrolling message on the website. And, usually from our experience speaking to people who've had this issue, Rory, it's not a case where a malicious third party has gone after that therapist. It's usually to do with an out-of-date piece of software. Yeah. And there's little pieces of software that crawl the web, and they look for websites which have an exploit or an exposure to a virus, and they will exploit it. And it's not personal, it's not targeted. But again, coming back to this concept of credibility is out the window if you have something like this in your website. Furthermore, if Google finds your website has been hacked, it will delist your website. Not good for your credibility in the search results. So really good question to ask your website designer, who's going to look after these updates? Is it me or is it you? And establish the process for that very early on. I'll be honest with you, Rory, a web healer, we look after it as a default because we understand it's what we do. This is our department. We couldn't expect our customers to do it, simply because it's technical, it's nuanced, and the risks are too high for getting it wrong. So we like to take control of it from the outset. But it is a question you should ask your website designer if you are thinking about getting a website done by a design company.
Well, more great advice. This is turning out to be so useful, full of information. And I guess that, modern websites integrate with things such as social media. We've talked about calendars, booking systems, teletherapy platforms, and there's a great deal of expertise needed to be able to link these two together and get them to work properly, I'm guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, there's no doubt about it. These platforms have been working hard in recent years to provide integration, because at the end of the day, these platforms exist and thrive when people are using them. So the ability to connect them into your website, thankfully, it's becoming easier and easier and easier. However, the method of this happening is by these third parties. They give you a piece of code. Now, when you see this code, you don't know the top from it, from the bottom of it, and it can be quite complex in nature. You're looking at this piece of programming code because that's what it is. And so, if you're looking at this and you put it into your website incorrectly, it's not going to work, frankly, and you've lost out. So a website designer will absolutely be familiar with this process. They can take this code, they can put it into your website. They can also style this third-party platform. So if it's a calendar booking system, they can style it to look the same as your website. So your website doesn't suddenly descend into this mismatch of system 1, system 2, and system 3. Remember, a website is all about conveying your personality. That can come down to the color scheme that you choose. If you've got a very bright and intense color scheme, well, maybe what does it say about you? It might say that you're quite a high energy person. However, if your color scheme is nice, mellow and earthy, it might mean that you're more relaxed, etc. So it's important to keep that vibe throughout your website. And when you're integrating these third-party pieces of code for calendars, booking, and whatnot, it's important that the journey flows on the same tone. So make sure they're integrated correctly. I suppose it's also just worth pointing out when it comes to integrating social media, just a caveat. Obviously, on social media, you're not always in control of what people can post on social media. So if you have a Facebook feed from your Facebook page or a Twitter feed and so forth, and somebody engages you in perhaps a not so savory manner, bear in mind that information could show up on your website. So I would cautiously recommend integrating your social media feed into your website, because it shows, again, you're active, you're out there on the web, you're savvy, you're aware. But just bear in mind that the content that's posted on a third-party website, which ultimately you have no control over, could feature on your website. So just a small caveat there for the listeners to keep that under close review. And again, if you need to remove something, make sure that you have a relationship with your designer such that if you send them an email, it'll be done in a timely fashion. And you're not going to have to wait for a week or two, or if you ring your web designer, they might be just getting on a plane to Spain for a couple of weeks and you'll have to wait. Make sure that you have the support when you need it from a technical point of view, for updates, for and for addressing things like I just mentioned around social media.
Yeah, I mean, this is just great advice, and I think what you're doing is you're shining a light on areas of having a website that probably people haven't realised. There's a few things that I really hadn't realised that have been so useful during this conversation. I guess, last but not least, there is a reporting element within having a website. Having analytics and being able to see who's come in and gaining information is hugely important for someone who owns a website, because I guess that can shape the kind of services and the messages that they're putting on it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important to see return on investment of the work that you're doing. And, obviously the most obvious way is to see, am I getting inquiries and bookings through my website? I mean, that is the acid test. If you're not, you need to delve deeper. And so you need to look at your analytics and your reporting and say, what are people accessing on my website? Are they accessing my homepage and leaving? Are they landing on my website through not necessarily the homepage, but my services page? Is there some content that people are engaging in more than others? So you may, practice in a certain area, and within that area, there's a couple of, options within that again, and you're producing content on your website, and you find that area A is performing better than area B, then, you should go after area A. What does that mean? Practically speaking, well, it should mean that you produce more content speaking to area A. Maybe that's a certain type of therapy. Maybe it's a walking therapy, for example. So if you're getting a lot of traction on your content on walking therapy, then maybe you need to produce more content on that. The benefits of walking therapy. What does a typical walking therapy session look like? Where do we go? What do we talk about? What happens if someone walks past us? What do we do? What do we say? What if I meet somebody I know, etc.? And so your analytics will give you the feedback on how people are engaging with your website, because once you put your website up there, for the most part, if you don't use your analytics tools, you don't know what people are looking at. And okay, you might get some headline numbers in terms of visitors, but how they're interacting with your website is incredibly important. And actually, I might drop the name of an incredibly useful service which we have no affiliation to, but it's actually remarkable. It's a service I've come across recently called luckyorange.com. And yeah, I know, a very funny name, Rory, but very quickly, it's a piece of code that your web designer will integrate into your website. It's a free service up to a certain limit, but I think it should suffice for most of the listeners. And what it does is it tracks the activity on your website and how people interact with your website. So I'd invite your listeners, if they're interested, to go and have a look at it. Make sure, the data, security and privacy, it's all there. So from that point of view, boxes are ticked. But it's an incredibly useful tool to see how people interact with your website. You may think, of your website, you've designed it in such a way that the logic of that website flows beautifully. But you might find when you investigate the stats that people can't navigate your website, that they can't get from page 1 to page 2. And your analytics and reporting will really kind of help you with that. And that specific website I mentioned, great service for that, really useful tool. And we've started to use it on some of our own websites, and it's yielded some really interesting insights and information. So really valuable tool. Make sure you have really solid analytics, that you know how to interpret them. And if you don't know how to interpret them, that you have somebody to ring or email and ask them for advice, like a web designer.
Well, I think this has been an illuminating conversation, Dara, and certainly I've learned so much. I thought I was pretty clued up on website design and things, but there's a few words that I'm going to be Googling afterwards to get more information. So as always, Dara McLaughlin from WebHealer, thank you so much for joining us today.
Roy, thank you very much, and thank you to your listeners.
Thank you for listening to the Counseling Tutor podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counselingtutor.com.